Okay, I will take this opportunity to just give you a little miniature introduction of Mark Fullenkamp's and my project, which is the Fort Madison Prison Memory Project. I'm Gemma Goodale-Sesson. I'm from the Department of English. I'm a grad student. And Mark, who is microphoning presently, is the Director of Web Services at the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So we'll talk to you just a little bit. We'll give you, time is short, but we will give you a little bit of an overview of the history of the prison at Fort Madison, describe the archive that we are honored to be able to be working with, and then give you some ideas of how this could be connected to the University of Iowa.
Okay, about a year and a half ago, I learned that the Iowa State Penitentiary at Fort Madison was closing down. I think you've heard this from John earlier. The prison's 175 years old. And my mother had worked there right out of high school in the early 60s, ordered the last ropes for the last hanging in 1963. I had uncles who went through the prison as guards, and the prison is right there. It's part of the community. It's been there longer than we've been a state. So when the bell would ring, for the lunch hour, the whole town hears it. It's right there. That doesn't happen anymore. As Nick would tell you, this place is just big stone walls, 25, 30 feet high, and old prisons were built like boxes. The new prison that they're moving to is a state-of-the-art facility. But what I wanted to capture, I decided that this thing was so important. I wanted to go down and photograph the prison while it was still alive. So I started calling people around the university, including Rachel Williams back there, and saying, how do you get in, to the prisons? Okay. So you beat down doors, you ask a lot of questions. I end up down at the prison, and I think also Rachel had told me about this rumor about these glass plate negatives, just decaying down there. So I asked Nick and Rebecca Bowker about it. I ended up in this shed, and Gemma, if you switch to the next slide. Well, that's the prison in 1950. There were all these boxes, and most of them were made out of National Biscuit boxes from the 19th century to hold what you can see in there are glass plate negatives. Since Gemma and I are doing a little Donnie and Marie today, I'm gonna start to show you what we got into, and Gemma's gonna tell you about how taking these glass plate negatives, I talked to a guy from the Metropolitan Museum of Art on how to digitize them. And it was take a light table, get a copy stand, and start photographing them with a 50 millimeter lens. And then I brought them up to John, examples of how this could be done for a digital archive. And John said, great, how can we do this? And that's when we ended up having me train offenders on this, take over from there.
So basically what we are working with are glass plate negatives of prisoner ID photos. These images date back to we believe the 1860s, and they go up through the 1950s. So even just there, you have quite a cross-section of Iowa history. You have this, pictorial encapsulation of history. And Mark is going to come around with his weird rubber glove situation. And
I don't want to touch these without rubber gloves,
right.
But what I wanted to show you is, at the end of the probably the 1870s, they started taking, glass. Whenever you took a photo, you put a silver nitrate on there, a solution, and you had to sensitize the glass. And you'll see a certain film on this, and most of these images would have damage like you can see up here. Like a bug had laid an egg in the box, and it had sprouted and squirmed around. Now flip it over. So after I started digitizing this, then all of a sudden these eyes, see these faces, you see that human aspect, and that's the thing that I've heard especially last night during Edgar's the Q&A. It's about this human aspect, humanizing people who are in prisons. And that's what I want to tell the story about, the lives of these guys. You look into those eyes and you're thinking, what's going on? And keep clicking through. This is from the 1870s. And when you see this up on a screen or printed out, it is so tack sharp. It looks like it came straight out of National Geographic last week.
Like I would walk into my office and, blown them up to the point where it was like the person was sitting across from you. And you can really, this one in particular, as Mark mentioned, is like you can see the individual stubble on the man's face.
And the things got weirder. They started to change, how they did inmate. This again goes back to, the history of glass plate negatives, photography, incarceration. But one of the things we were seeing time and time again is there was a lot of decay, and John and Nick said, hey, let's get this up to Des Moines. Let's start digitizing them.
So at this point, all of the glass plates are digitized. Had someone from Mitchellville doing that work. Mark trained them to use computers and to do scanning work. So we have 11,000 images.
Over 11,000. And we still have a second part to this. There's all these paper documents that will go into this online archive that we're trying to build with the DOC and with the University of Iowa. So we've got the Department of History and Sociology involved, and then we've got the guys down at Library Archives. I saw Paul Sotterdale in here earlier. So their IT group has said that they would love to host it here. Archives wants to put the actual source documents here. And Karen Heimer from Sociology and Jackie Rand and the History Corps group, who we'll talk later, are really interested in giving this to undergrads and grad students to actually do hands-on archiving. Go back one, if you would, real quick. I think there's something else interesting. Go back. Keep going. Okay, come forward. I love this guy. You can tell so much about the culture. He's got earrings. This is like early 1880s or late 1870s. We don't know for sure yet, but he's got earrings and missing an eye, and it's like, what kind of a culture did he come from, to have that? Go to the next one and come back one. And some of these have an aesthetic. Some of these are really beautiful in their own way. And they're all, as much as this should be boom, 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 the same shot over and over, they're individuals. And that's what struck me. And
exactly. You have like a Russian icon.
Yeah.
Nature of the...
I usually have that halo around me as well. So, Gemma, I want you to talk a little bit about outcomes. What's next? What
we are hoping to do, and you can flip through here, is to get the university engaged on a number of levels. One way to do that would be to have undergraduate students, especially in the Department of having hands-on work archive. So this could be practice course, essentially, for students who want archives. And this is sort of what Director Baldwin was talking about as well. It's the idea of you get out of the workplace and you can say, I helped digitize and coordinate an entire archive. The other way that this is, I think, useful to the University of Iowa will be graduate student and faculty research and scholarship. Certainly we have partners in the history department, sociology, psychology. I'm in the English department, so one example of that, I'm intending to write my dissertation as a comparative analysis of literary and visual prison narratives, making use of the ISP archive.
I think this shot right here is really important, especially to Tom Keegan, as it is, the first documented hipster to be incarcerated.
Shout out to Tom Keegan there. And then finally, ultimately, we want to bring this back to the community of Fort Madison, orchestrate a sort of commemorative event to begin as a community to work through the ways that having Iowa State Penitentiary there for 175 years matters to them. And so I think we're probably just about out of time.
I do have one last thing. There's so many stories we picked up from this already before we've got the documents done. So the paper documents are still down at the prison, and John has gone out and got the equipment to start scanning them. So that's what we're going to do next. But we're already picking up stories about, some of these photos were taken by, one of the most notorious murderers in the state of Iowa, who ended up down at Fort Madison in 1905, where he became the prison photographer. So they were taken by this guy named Frank Novak, who was the first man also convicted by use of forensic science.
Right.
I think that's an interesting one.
The University of Iowa Press actually published his story, which is called The Skull and the Ashes. And it's about, the first forensic evidence.
All right, and if there's any more interest, I think this thing is going to keep going and getting bigger. And I think the Des Moines Register is going to have an article on this tomorrow.